You're watching WLWT News 5, leading the way.
So when you have an emergency, the first thing many of us think to do is call 911. But what happens when the people taking your call don't send help?
Last year, 6 people died when flooding washed away a bridge in the small town of Laurel, Indiana. Multiple people called 911, but our investigation uncovered a 911 nightmare: failure to dispatch. It's been a year and Josh Mosier is still just trying to get through each day with his daily chores on the farm. But he can't shake the horrific memory of what happened one dark, rainy morning in March of last year.
That's the reoccurring nightmare, is seeing that, is hearing them scream, and it's like I'm behind a wall and I can't get to them.
The bridge is gone.
He was driving into work and got a terrifying call.
So I don't know how to tell you this, but I believe it's her van upside down in the creek.
Inside that van, Josh's 2 little girls, 4-year-old Kylie and 7-year-old Elysium, along with their mother Felina and her teenage son Ethan.
The water was so high, you couldn't tell, you couldn't see the license plate. You could just see about half the rim.
This is what the Sains Creek looks like on a normal day, but after hours and hours of pouring rain, floodwaters were so high they washed away the bridge above. When the van was finally pulled from the water, no one was inside.
I had to find them. It's real simple, had to find them.
Josh hopped in and started wading through the water, searching for his babies. About a mile downstream,
Yeah, I found her right there.
an image he'll never get out of his head.
I just picked her up and squeezed her and scream and cry, and I just carried her from here through that little pasture up to my house. I laid her in the garage, and I laid with her, and I loved on her, and I told her that she didn't have to scream or yell for me anymore. But that I wasn't done, that I had to go find her sister. I gave her a kiss and told her I loved her, and I went back to the water.
A short time later, he found his oldest daughter the same way. No one escaped. Felina and Ethan, along with 2 other men whose car was also swept away, all died that morning. 6 lives gone.
911, where's your emergency? Yes, the bridge here on Sains Creek, at the bottom of Sains Creek Hill, is completely washed out. It's gone.
What Josh didn't realize until days later, this tragedy could have been prevented.
Yeah, it's flooded bad, really bad.
3 calls were made to 911 that morning, one just after 3 a.m., a second one at 4:18, and then again at 4:46.
Somebody better get down here and block it off before somebody goes into the river.
But help never came. Within 40 minutes of that call, Felina, who was on her way to work and taking the kids to the babysitters, came down Sains Hill and drove right into the rushing water.
All it would have taken was a car with flashing lights to block the road, and the traffic would have been averted, and we wouldn't be sitting here today.
Josh hired attorney Tim Devereaux to find out why dispatchers didn't send help, and what they discovered was disturbing. The complaint filed against Franklin County claims 911 operators were making numerous postings on their personal social media accounts at the exact time the 911 calls came in. While rescuers were still searching for the victims, the chief deputy calls into dispatch, also questioning how this happened.
Can you check and see if somebody called in and said that the bridge was out on Sains Creek around 3 a.m.? God help whoever didn't pass that on if it did.
There was a call at 4:18. It says, advise that the bridge on Sains Creek is completely washed away.
What did they do with it?
It looks like it was made an I-call.
Are you kidding me?
An I-call meaning information only, and a deputy doesn't have to respond. Josh is suing Franklin County and the Sheriff's Department, and in response, the county denies it was negligent and claims as a government agency they are immune from liability. I called the sheriff and the attorney representing the county. I've yet to receive a response. The bridge was quickly repaired, but Josh believes until real changes are made within Franklin County's 911 system and dispatch centers across the state, it's only a matter of time before this happens again.
It has to change. There has to be a different system, a different procedure when them calls come in.
And when something happens like this, what?
there's not another family sitting here talking to you the way I am, that it's handled differently. Maybe a life will be saved.
The 911 supervisor was fired by the Franklin County Sheriff's Department about a week after the incident, but the two other dispatchers who took those calls were not.
And there's much more to the story. The investigation continues.
Yeah, so tonight at 11 o'clock, you need to tune in. I'm talking with just one of the people who made two of the 911 calls about her haunting memory of that night. As you can imagine, she and other people in this small town are very angry. They say this never should have happened.
Hearing that last call from the deputy when they got the 3 911 calls and they did not send anybody out, that is the thing that will stick with me.
He knew instantly. That was within 12 hours of everything happening and the cars going in the water. And as soon as he heard it, you can tell as the 911 call goes on with him that he knew something failed that morning.
Part 2 tonight, 11 o'clock.
You're watching WLWT News 5, leading the way.
More now on our ongoing investigation. 911 failure to dispatch. So 1 year ago, 6 people died when floodwaters washed away a bridge in Laurel, Indiana.
Now, what we didn't know until now is that several calls were made to 911 dispatchers in Franklin County that morning, warning them that the road was flooded and someone was going to get hurt. Tonight, I talk with the first people who called for help and who are still tortured by what happened next. It was one tragic moment, a few seconds, that changed Josh Mosier's world forever.
It actually took a few days for me to realize that it was real.
His 2 little girls, only 4 and 7 years old, were swept away in floodwaters when the bridge that goes over the Sains Creek in the small Indiana town of Laurel collapsed.
I wanted to believe that they died immediately, and that wasn't the case. They was screaming and headlights bouncing up and down out of the trees.
Even more heart-wrenching, Josh is the one who found their tiny, lifeless bodies in the water. Kylie washed up a mile from the crumbled bridge in Josh's backyard.
I laid with her and I loved on her, and I told her that she didn't have to scream or yell for me anymore.
A year later, Josh still struggles to get through each day. He consumes his time with chores on his farm.
There you go, ladies.
But inside, he's filled with emotion, a lot of sadness, a lot of anger. Anger for what didn't happen that morning.
The road was getting worse and worse. I mean, within minutes, we was stuck down there and couldn't get back.
Ronnie and Robin Wlwt were the first people to notice the flooding.
I had my window down. I went to shine my spotlight. Now I got drowned. It had come in my truck.
That was at 3 a.m., 2 hours before the girl's mother unknowingly drove in the dark over that washed-out bridge. Ronnie called 911, telling dispatchers they needed to get someone out to block off the road.
It's flooded bad. It's really bad.
For 2 hours, Ronnie and Robin watched and worried.
We knew within an hour traffic was going to start getting heavy. People had to go to work.
During that time, 2 more people called 911.
911, where's your emergency? Yes, the bridge here on Sains Creek at the bottom of Sains Creek Hill is completely washed out. It's gone. Somebody better get down here and block it off before somebody goes into the river.
But help never came. No deputy, no emergency workers to stop traffic. Instead, a complaint filed against Franklin County claims 911 operators were making numerous postings on their personal social media accounts at the exact time the 911 calls came in. In response, the county denies it was negligent and claims as a government agency they're immune from liability. I called the sheriff multiple times and the attorney representing the county. I've yet to get a response. What were you worried about?
I was worried about somebody getting hurt. And we called, that's the reason we called, to tell them.
2 hours after their first call, Ronnie calls again, this time telling dispatchers a van filled with kids is in the water.
We seen headlights disappear, then they floated back up, and they was really murky looking. The next thing you know, down there, like around behind his garage down there, you heard screams and hollers. Sounds like children. And then everything just went silent.
It was kids. It was kids screaming is what we heard.
The sounds still haunt Ronnie and Robin. The images haunt Josh.
That's the reoccurring nightmare, is seeing that, is hearing them scream, and it's like I'm behind a wall and I can't get to them.
So they all want to know the same thing now. How could emergency workers not help in an emergency? And why hasn't anything happened? The 911 supervisor was fired by the Franklin County Sheriff's Department about a week after that incident. But the two other dispatchers who took those 911 calls that night were not.
Obviously powerful stuff there, Cherie. You mentioned 6 people in all died. Have you had the opportunity to speak with other families?
Yeah, right. So it was that mother, Felina Lewis, along with her 3 children. But also that night, 2 men died, Sean Roberts and Burton Spurlock. Burton's mom actually called me after our 6 o'clock report earlier tonight. She just had her first Mother's Day without her only son. And as you can imagine, everyone is just devastated by this loss. It was hard enough to lose their family members, but now to hear that it all could have and should have been prevented is just even more tragic.
Yeah, part 1, very powerful also. And if you missed it earlier at 6, it's on our website, WLWT.com.
You're watching WLWT News 5, leading the way.
6 people died in a tragic incident on a bridge in the small town of Laurel, Indiana, when flooding washed away the bridge. Multiple people called 911, but dispatchers never sent help.
Tonight, new evidence filed by the plaintiffs giving us a new look at what was really going on inside that 911 call center that morning. And we're also hearing from the man in charge.
It's a story you will see only here on WLWT and our ongoing investigation, 911 nightmare, failure to dispatch. On the morning of March 20th, 2020, rain had been pouring down for hours. The Sains Creek was flooding fast, and neighbors were worried.
Yeah, it's flooded bad. It's flooded bad. Yes, the bridge here on Sains Creek, at the bottom of Sains Creek Hill, is completely washed out. It's gone.
3 911 calls were made in 40 minutes, specifically about the Sains Creek Bridge. Despite 3 dispatchers being on call, no one sent help.
Somebody better get down here and block it off before somebody goes into the river.
That call, eerie foreshadowing for what was going to happen. 36 minutes later, another call saying a car was in the water. A mother and her 3 children drove right into the rushing water. Shortly after, a pickup with 2 men was swept away too. Josh Mosier, who talked with me earlier this year, lost his 2 little girls.
They was screaming and headlights bouncing up and down out of the trees.
Now, for the first time, we're seeing what was going on inside that 911 call center. According to court records, 3 dispatchers were working that morning, a supervisor, a dispatcher who'd been on the job 6 months, and another dispatcher who'd only been training for 4 weeks. That trainee was the one taking the calls about the bridge being washed away. During a deposition with attorneys, John Hunley, the supervisor in charge of Franklin County's 911 department, admits it wasn't a busy night. Only 7 calls total came in during that 40 minutes, and he believes his dispatchers should have sent help.
So you get a call that a bridge has washed out.
Yes.
Are you calling county highway?
Yes.
Are you calling a sheriff's deputy?
Yes. If there's one available, yes.
And is that the policy of the department?
Yes.
The policy and procedure manual spells out a county highway supervisor should always be called if there's any type of obstruction or failure to a Franklin County road. Not only did that trainee not send help, but the supervisor who was listening in on the call didn't send help either.
Yeah, do you agree that after receiving that call and not doing anything about it, the dispatcher's actions showed a complete lack of regard for the danger to the motoring public at the Sains Creek Bridge area?
Yes.
And that's not all. In video we obtained from inside the call center, you see the supervisor hang up from the 911 call and reach straight for his cell phone. In a lawsuit filed by the families, they claim he was on Facebook, posting these messages to social media.
Can you sit here under oath and tell me anything that you've ever seen that's worse in terms of a 911 dispatcher's indifference to a life-threatening situation that's just been reported?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Thank you, sir.
Life doesn't stop.
Josh Mosier will never get his girls back, but he wants the people who were supposed to be protecting them held accountable so another family doesn't have to feel the same pain. Franklin County officials say the supervisor who was posting to Facebook that day was fired. We've just learned another dispatcher who was there that night recently quit. The trainee still works there. The county maintains its emergency workers are protected by immunity. Now, we've reached out to the county multiple times for comment, but our calls have not been returned.
You would think on a night like that they would be really busy there in a 911 call center, but I remember that night vividly and talking with Kevin. It all came on so fast and they really weren't as busy as I would expect.
And I think that's what that video was so shocking. Everyone assumed, well, they had to, maybe they were just taking multiple calls and they were getting people diverted to other problem areas, but you see in that video from the dispatch center, that wasn't the case.
All right, a great story, and I'm sure there'll be more to come.
Yes, absolutely. The lawsuit continues.
Right.